We have a ship docked at DS9 of the distinctly cardigan flavour. Some people climb aboard and close the door, after which a furtive-looking lad in a Starfleet uniform pops open a hatch on their ship and starts fiddling about. Bit odd that they'd wait until there's nobody around to watch, and even odder when the ship in question does a massive kaboom shortly after undocking. That's clearly not an ideal situation under any circumstances, but losing a cardigan ship and the entire crew at a Bajoran station might cause one or two political problems. Best that we find out exactly what happened as soon as possible, as it's only a matter of time before their mates come asking. O'Brien's a methodical man, though, and doesn't want to rule anything out until he's absolutely sure, which isn't what Sisko wants to hear, as Starfleet are breathing down his neck. The Bajorans are getting ready for some rough stuff, just in case the shit hits the fan, despite them denying any involvement, but the Cardigans have been oddly silent. Everybody had expected them to be in touch by now. We'll have to figure that out later, as O'Brien's found something, traces of a material used in Federation tech, and one that we don't share. Couple that with Dax concluding there was a gizmo attached to the ship to overload the engines, something suggested by a reading she got just before it kaboomed, and the evidence doesn't look good for us. O'Brien starts doing a very serious science to confirm the overload as someone new arrives in ops. Except it's not someone new, at least not to Sisko. His name's Calvin Hudson, and it seems like he knew Dax's previous host too. He's here because he's the guy charged with representing Federation colonies in the demilitarized zone, an area between the Federation and the Cardigans. If anything kicks off, they're going to be the closest targets. They go to Sisko's office, and after a little catching up, during which we learn Hudson is also a widower, they get down to business. Hudson's not happy with the treaty that established the demilitarized zone, as it means some Federation colonies are now on the other side of a redrawn border. True, some Cardigan colonies are now on our side, but Hudson's not convinced that our people will be protected to quite the same level as we'll protect theirs. Everybody was given the chance to move, of course, an option roundly rejected by people who'd made these places their homes. Suffice to say, then, that there are some pretty pissed-off colonists who feel like they've been sacrificed on the altar of diplomacy. There is one positive, at least. Hudson thinks there won't be any official unpleasantness with us because the Cardigans know they got a good deal. If anything comes, he thinks it'll be aimed at the Bajorans. A Vulcan, or possibly Romulan, is talking to the guy from the start of the show and trying to look like she isn't. She's telling him to lay low in some arranged quarters till he can get off the station, though, based on the fact that they were being watched, it may be a little too late for that. The Vulcan or Romulan, who we learned is called Sakona, heads to Quark's for a chat. His initial panic about his past actions catching up with him is dismissed when she tells him that she's here to talk business. He pulls out a bottle of Vulcan booze, so we'll trust that he knows the difference and assume she's Vulcan, but she declines the drink. She'd also prefer to discuss business in private, so he arranges for her to return later so they can talk over dinner. Here's hoping Sakona's evening turns out better than the guy she was just talking to, as he's busy getting kidnapped by the people who are watching them. Unexpected meetings are starting to become a theme. Sisko returns to his quarters looking for Jake and instead finds Gul Dukat. Sisko has Kira track down Jake to make sure he's somewhere safe, all while Dukat pretends to be aghast at the idea he may have done anything. He doesn't need to, he's already made his point by getting here unnoticed. To business then, and Dukat says he's here as a friend. He wants to help Sisko sort out his little exploding ship issue, and it's better if it were handled by the Federation, as the Federation is the problem. Sisko calls bullshit, obviously, despite the material evidence from earlier, which is fine as Dukat wants to prove it. And to do that, we'll need to take a little jaunt into the demilitarized zone. The flight goes much as you'd expect, a trading of unpleasantries without open hostility, so someone else provides the hostility instead. There's a Federation merchant ship sending out a distress call with 2 Cardigan vessels chasing it, which would be a little bit naughty even if we weren't in a place that expressly forbids warships. We rush over to find the warships are actually just shuttles, but somebody strapped a not insignificant amount of weaponry onto them. Dukat gives them a call and orders them to stand down, an order they entirely ignore. Dukat threatens them with death if they don't comply, only for somebody else to beat him to it. Another Federation ship, one carrying oversized weapons of its own, pops in and farts fireworks at the 2 shuttles until they're just debris. Hostilities between the Federation and Cardigans might officially be over, but it looks like there are some people on both sides who feel differently. Even for a species that consider business and pleasure to be the same thing, Quark's still pushing the boat out. Attempting to charm a Vulcan is a pretty optimistic outlook, but that's not going to stop him giving it a go. Our boy likes a challenge. She's confused by how elaborate things are, perhaps not having understood his intent, but tolerates it, along with some attempts to show how similar they are once you look past the obvious differences. Those differences may have been overstated, as she's here to buy weapons. She's not fucking about either. She wants everything from sidearms to ships, and she's interested in a regular supply. Let's get a closer look at where those toys are likely heading. People are having a good old shout at each other when we arrive, a Cardigan arguing the ship that they shot at was carrying weapons. Hudson's here too and saying it carried medical supplies. Both are surprised to see Sisko and Dukat, though the Cardigan, who we learn is called Gull Avec, acts far less comfortable with developments. Dukat, having just been ignored by his pilots, might be the reason why. Back to the argument, and Gull Avec is accusing the Federation of trying to do a little bit of the old terrorism. He even has proof, a confession from the guy who we saw having a fiddle with the kaboomed ship from the start of the show, and somebody who, apparently, came from this colony. We can't ask him about the confession ourselves, sadly, as he was so overcome with remorse that he deaded himself shortly after providing it. How clumsy of his jailers to permit it. The resulting unpleasantness has Dukat removing his people and Hudson doing the same before anybody else gets killed. The conversation between Hudson and Sisko afterwards is an awkward one. Hudson's trying to explain how things really are on the ground, the level of betrayal felt by the colonists, the unreported violence against Federation settlers by Cardigan authorities. Sisko's still not quite grasped how things are and suggests a formal diplomatic response, an idea Hudson mocks. He thinks this whole thing is being organised unofficially by the very people that diplomatic response would be sent to. Open aggression would break the treaty. Settlers having their own disagreements? Well, that's a private matter, and who's to say how they got hold of weapons that you would normally see on military ships? Hudson suggests those weapons may have been related to the exploding ship at DS9, something Sisko rejects as there was nothing in the debris to suggest this. The idea might have been enough to drive someone to destroy it though, and Sisko doesn't think Dukat would be doing this if he couldn't prove guilt. Hudson doesn't know if the guy was guilty, but he's clear on something else. He thinks the Federation stiffed every colonist here, and he doesn't blame them for defending themselves against aggression that the Federation refuses to see, because it's politically inconvenient. Things are a little strained between Sisko and Dukat on the ride home. Dukat says he didn't know about the unfortunate death of the suspect, and even goes so far as to not deny he was murdered when Sisko pushes it, though doesn't outright admit it either. He's also convinced that a certain exploding ship at DS9 didn't have weapons on, or at least says he is. He swears it on the lives of his children, the value of that promise being rather dependent on how he treats them. Speaking of treats, Quark's getting a visit from Sakona to see how he's coming along with hers. She's changing her plans and intends to leave tonight, something that Quark still thinks he can swing with his supplier. Perhaps she wants to get out before things get too hot with this current investigation. Sisko's back and, after assigning Dukat some quarters until he can leave, goes to Ops. O'Brien has confirmed the explosion was deliberate and also that the device was Federation, which at least means Sisko has some news for his own bosses, even if it is terrible. Before he can call them, Kira decides to involve herself. The excuse is so she can pass on news to her government, but the real reason is to tell him the Cardigans are a bunch of bastards and he should be cheering on anybody willing to fight them. And fighting them is precisely what's happening on DS9. The guard assigned to Dukat's quarters takes a sleepy time massage to the neck, and Dukat is told by the replacement and Sakona that another device has been found on a Cardigan ship. If he'd asked why a Vulcan was delivering the news, maybe he wouldn't have found himself trapped in a dock with the guy we saw attack Gull Avec at the colony earlier. A bit of punching leads to a bit of Dukat getting shot in the arse, and he's dragged away by all concerned. Sisko's getting his arse chewed from the looks of things, and the rest of the staff are talking about it. He comes out angry and demands a full review of security, which isn't going to help the current situation, but at least makes him feel a bit better. Only a couple of ships have left the station recently, and one of those went through the wormhole. As there's only one way back through, that's probably not the kidnapper. Some checks on the other prove it to be phony, and O'Brien gives Sisko its unique warp flavour, so we can try to track it. There's a development before we can set off, though, a call sent out from the demilitarised zone. Credit is being taken for the kidnapping of Dukat by a group called the MAQUIS. Feels like a smart place to start looking then, and O'Brien confirms it when he calls Sisko's megashuttle with news that another ship has spotted the warp flavour we were looking for. They were heading for an area called the Badlands, a section of space with some very unpleasant wibblies and a propensity for ships getting kidnapped by a banjo-strumming wanker 70,000 light-years away. The mega shuttle stumbles onto the warp flavor and follows it to an asteroid. Curious thing though, there are no Cardigan life signs. There's a chance they deposited Dukat somewhere else, so off we go to ask them. We teleport down and are greeted by a lot of armed people and Cal Hudson. From the looks of things, he doesn't appear to be there in an official capacity, but we'll have to wait until the next episode to ask him, as we're told the story is to be continued. Here we go then. Tensions are finally starting to kick off for real, the uneasy peace having simmered along for nearly a couple of years now. It comes not from the direction we expected, that of something boiling over on Bajor, but from the Federation itself. We learn that some diplomats shat the bed during peace negotiations, or at least those affected feel that way, and now we're dealing with the aftermath. It all raises plenty of questions, such as how an existing population deals with state-backed invasive settlers who use casual violence and persecution, or what actions those people should take in order to defend their existence while those with the power to do something try to pretend it isn't happening. The stuff with the demilitarized zone also raises a wider question, though. Can the Federation afford to deal with all other species based on our own principles rather than theirs? We've certainly seen the Cardigans try to pull nefarious shit before, and Sisko mentions arming Bajoran rebels through back channels, but what happened as a result of that other than slight embarrassment for them? We certainly didn't hear of any consequences. Based on that response, then, well, why wouldn't they have a go at arming their colonists? We certainly haven't given them a reason not to. There's nothing inherently wrong with having diplomacy as your preferred option, not just from an ethical standpoint, but also because bullets cost money. The issue is with treating it as your only option while the other side violates the agreements you've already made. You know what they say about the definition of insanity. Discovery has perhaps the best example of this. After losing their first ship to a Klingon attack, Vulcans adopted the approach of immediately firing on any Klingon ship that entered weapons range. The result was, they stopped getting attacked. Some people might look at that and argue it makes the Vulcans just as bad, but there is a difference. Vulcan ships didn't start looking for fights. They provided a proportional response when the fight came to them. People who don't share your values aren't likely to respect them from words alone. Decades of people screaming at each other on the internet has taught us that. Let's save some debate for the second part then and wrap up, but before we go, there's what I thought was a nice little touch from the property department on this one. I saw this laptop with its slot for isolinear rods and thought, why would the Federation have a computer that just accepted Cardigan data storage formats? Some clever bastard had preempted me though, as just in front of it is a slot that's presumably for Federation isolinear chips. Now it's a computer sent to a disputed area that'll take data storage from both sides of the argument and makes perfect sense under the circumstances. At least, that's what I thought until I explored things in more detail. The same computer model, perhaps even the same prop, has been used previously without the rod port. Exustriciencia.org has a rundown of the details, and I'll stick a link in the description, but what I'd imagined was forethought turned out to be an alteration made just for this episode. We can still use it as headcanon, of course. Starfleet designing a bespoke laptop for those near the border is just the sort of thing I can imagine them doing, both as a political gesture and a technological flex. But the situation with the prop raises a more interesting point for me. Someone, either in the script or the properties department, wanted to use an isolinear rod for accuracy, and that had the knock-on effect of needing to alter existing items. How many times has that already happened, and we just didn't notice? For all the times we've pointed out things to mock, it's a testament to the skill and versatility of the prop makers that so many others go by unnoticed, and often as a result of requests that nobody saw coming. Some points, then, to the unsung crafters of Trek, whose physical fiction makes the world we watch, and whose lies are convincing more often than not. End of episode.
Roll up, Space Dog and Computer are now offering an adventuring service.
All tasks considered, no job too large or too small. Well, okay, some jobs too large, we're dogs.
Excuse me there, sir, do you happen to have a quest that you need complete? Well, there's no need for that now, is there?
Very reasonable rates, we can fit our services to your budget.
Have you considered how much easier your life would be if... Yeah, and the same to you, mate.
Discretion guaranteed for any and all clients. You wouldn't believe the secrets we're already holding. Seriously though, people want us dead.
Oi, dickhead, give us a job. Woof.